It is even possible that my ancestry might not move in the direction of ancient Israel at all. After 965, the Khazars were through as an organized power, but Judaism may have remained. And it may well be that many East European Jews are descended from Khazars and the people they ruled. I may be one of them. Who knows? And who cares? Isaac Asimov. It's been a good life, 2002. All right, so we're going to be reading from this book, okay? It's an international bestseller, okay, by Shlomo San. The Invention of the Jewish People. That's the name of the book. And again, this is one of their own people saying that. It's not me. I didn't write this book. Fair use. Shlomo San argues that most Jews actually descend from converts whose native lands were scattered far across the Middle East and Eastern Europe. The formation of a Jewish people and then a Jewish nation out of these disparate groups could only take place under the sway of a new historiography, developing in response to the rise of nationalism throughout Europe. Beneath the biblical backfill of the 19th century historians and the 20th century intellectuals who replaced rabbis as the architects of Jewish identity, architects, code word. The Invention of the Jewish People uncovers a new narrative of Israel's formation and proposes a bold analysis of nationalism and accounts for the old myth. So now we're going to belly flop to this part of the book. Again, we're in the book, The Invention of the Jewish People. It says here, Jewish Khagans, a strange empire rises in the East. In the middle of the 10th century, the Sephardic Golden Age, Hasdai ibn Shaprut, a physician and important statesman in the court of the Caliph of Cordoba, Adbar Rahman III, wrote a letter to the king of the Khazars, Joseph ben Adon. Rumors about a great Jewish empire bordering on Eastern Europe had reached the Jewish elites at the continent's western end and aroused intense curiosity. Was there, at long last, a Jewish kingdom that was not subordinate to Muslim or Christian powers? The letter opens with a poem of praise for the king, with an acrostic composed by Menahem ben Saruk, Hasdai's secretary and the leading Hebrew poet in the Iberian Peninsula, followed by the writer's introduction of himself, inter alia, of course, as a descendant of the exiles from Jerusalem, and a description of the kingdom in which he lives. Then he comes to the point. Merchants have told me that there is a kingdom of Jews called Khazare, and I did not believe it, because I thought they said this to please and approach me. I was puzzled about it, until emissaries arrived from Constantinople with a gift from their king to our king, and I asked them about it. They assured me that this was the truth, that the kingdom is called Al-Khazar. You see that with the Al, before it was Khazar, Al-Khazar. And between Al-Constantinople and their country, there was a journey of 15 days by sea, but on land there are many nations between us, and the name of its king is Joseph. And I, when I heard this, was filled with force, and my hands grew strong, and my hope intensified, and I bowed and made obeisance to the Lord of heaven. I searched for a faithful emissary to send to your land to find out the truth and to greet my lord the king and his servants, our brothers. But it was difficult to do, for the distance is very great. Khazare goes on to describe in detail all the difficulties entailed in dispatching the letter, and finally asks direct questions of what tribe is the king? What is the system of the monarchy? It is passed from father to son, as was done by the ancestors in the Torah. How big is the kingdom? How are its enemies? And over whom does it rule? Does war take precedence over the Sabbath? What is the country's climate? And so forth. Khazare curiosity has limitless, for which he apologized courteously. It is not known how long it took before the Khazare king's reply arrived, but in the extant letter, King Joseph answered Khazare's questions as best he could. He described his origin and boundaries of his kingdom. So the king of the Khazare says, "You have asked of what nation and family and tribe we are. Know you that we are the sons of Japhet and his son Togarma." Do you guys hear that? That's the king of the Khazare saying he is descendant of Japhet from his son Togarma. It is said that in his time my ancestors were but a few, and the Lord granted them strength and boldness, and they fought with many great nations mightier than they were, and with God's help drove them out and inherited their country. Many generations passed until a king rose whose name was Bulan, a wise and God-fearing man, who put all his trust in the Lord and removed all the sorcerers and idolaters from the country and lived under the Lord's wing. Alright, so Bulan, we're going to read about him later on. This king summoned all his ministers and servants and told them all these things. They were content and accepted the king's judgment and entered under the wing of the Shekinah. Then rose a king of his offspring named Obadiah, a righteous and honest man, who reformed the kingdom and set the law in the proper order, and built synagogues and seminaries and brought in many of the sages of Israel. Writing in an epic and ornate style, the king describes the conversion to Judaism and lists the reasons that moved his ancestors to prefer the Jewish religion to the other two monotheistic faiths. In a tone suffused with fervent belief in the Torah and the commandments, he goes on to describe the location of his kingdom, its size, its population, and the power of his enemies and rivals, the Russians and the Ishmaelites. Various literary embellishments of and additions to the old text led some scholars to conclude that these letters, especially the king's reply, were not written in the 10th century. It might be forgeries or emendations by Muslim authors. There are two versions of Joseph's letter, a long one and a short one, but certain terms in the short version do not belong in the Arabic lexicon, and its original author was not part of the Muslim cultural world. Moreover, the distinctive linguistic use of the biblical Hebrew reversing connection, Vav Ha He Puk, indicates that Khazare's letter and the king's reply were not written by one hand. The letter of the Khazare king was probably copied and embellished many times, but its core information seems fairly trustworthy as it accords with contemporary Arab testimonies and so cannot be dismissed as merely a literacy creation. In any event, there is evidence from the late 11th century that despite the difficulties of international communications, copies of both letters in several versions were found throughout the Jewish intellectual world. For example, Rabbi Yehuda al-Barceloni, who questioned the accuracy of these copies, commented, "We have seen some versions of the letter written by Joseph, the king, son of Aaron the Khazare priest, to Rabbi Khazare, son of Yitzchak, and did not know if it was true or not." Finally, though, this sharp scholar who detested fables became convinced, and he admitted as much, that Khazars proselytized and had proselyte kings. I have heard that all this is written in the books of Ishmaelites who were living then and wrote about it in their books. He therefore copied the letter of King Joseph and quoted a part of it in his own work. It is almost certain that the 12th century Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was familiar with the correspondence. He ascribed the conversion to Judaism by the Khazare monarch to a three-sided monotheistic brainstorming session. Its depiction in the opening of his work, the Khazare, is adapted from King Joseph's letter with some changes in style and detail. It should be noted that Rabbi Abraham ben David, who was several decades younger than Yehuda Halevi and was one of the fathers of Kabbalah and province, wrote of Eastern Europe. There were Khazare peoples who proselytized, and their king Joseph sent a letter to the president, Rabbi Khazare, son of Yitzchak, ben Shaprut, to tell him that he followed the rabbinate and so did all his people. He goes on to say that when in Litula, Toledo, he met Jewish students who told him that they were Khazars and faithful to rabbinical Judaism, whereas the histories of the Judaized Himyarites and Berbers were all but erased from the general consciousness, right? So right before this part of the book, he goes on to prove, and a lot of converts with the Berbers as well, and a lot of North Africans into Judaism. They weren't, but they took on the religion as well. So what he's saying here is that after this happened, they got erased from the general consciousness, these Berber Jews, Judaized Berbers, or Himyarites. It was more difficult to leave blank pages in the case of the Khazars. In the first place, the secular modern public knew about the Khazare, the theological treatise completed in 1140 CE by Yehudan Halevi, a highly respected figure in Jewish tradition and a canonical one in Zionist culture because of his particular association with the Holy Land. Second, there was a mass of historical evidence about the Khazar kingdom from Arabic, Persian, Byzantine, Russian, Armenian, Hebrew, and even Chinese sources. They all agreed that it was very powerful, and many of the sources also referred to its unexpected conversion to Judaism. They converted. Furthermore, the historical standing of this kingdom and the events that followed its breakup had been echoed in the earliest Jewish historiography in Eastern Europe, which battled with this issue for decades. Even Zionist reconstructors of the past hesitated for a long time to tackle the subject, and few of them attempted to research it with appropriate thoroughness. But the widespread interest in the Khazar kingdom eventually began to shrink, and it all but evaporated with the rise of the memory establishment in Israel after some 10 years of existence. Although the medieval kingdom of the Khazars existed in distant obscurity, and no gifted theologians had praised and immortalized it as the biblical authors had done in their time and place, it is, however, attested by external sources far more varied and abundant than exist about the kingdom of David and Solomon, the land of Prester John, the kingdom of Prester John. Jewish Khazare was, of course, immeasurably bigger than any historical kingdom in the land of Judah. It was also more powerful than Himyar, or the desert realm of Din Hia al-Kahina. The story of the Khazars is fascinating. It begins in the 4th century, when some nomadic tribes accompanied the Huns as they surged westward. All right, listen, it continues with the rise of a great empire in the steppes along the Volga River in the northern Caucasus, and ends with the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, which wiped out all traces of this extraordinary kingdom. The Mongol invasion, The Khazars were a coalition of a strong Turkic or Hunnic Bulgar clans. All right, these are your Khazars, who, as they began to settle down, mingled with the Scythians. They mingled with who? The sons of Isaac? The Scythians, Is that how they ended up being so-called Jews, who had inhabited these mountains and steppes between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which was known for a long time as the Khazar Sea? All right, that's a deep one right there. All right, when we have more understanding, right? Who are the Scythians? Remember, the Scythians were the Sakai. The Sakai became the Scythians. Eventually, the Scythians became the Saxons. So the Khazars, these Turkic and Hunnic Bulgar clans, ended up in the areas where the Scythians were. At its peak, the kingdom encompassed an assortment of tribes and linguistic groups: Alans and Bulgars, Magyars and Slavs, the Magyars language, linking it up with the ancient America. Remember that. The Khazars collected taxes from them all and ruled over a vast landmass, stretching from Kiev in the northwest to the Crimean Peninsula in the south, and from the upper Volga to present-day Georgia. From the 6th century on, Persian testimonies followed by Muslim ones shed light on the early stages of the Khazar saga. They invaded the Sassanid kingdom and harassed its border inhabitants. They got as far as the area around Mosul in today's Iraq. In the early 7th century, during the reign of the Persian king Khosrau II, a marriage with the Khazar king's daughter sealed an alliance that enabled the Persians to build fortifications in the passes of the Caucasus Mountains. Remains of these fortifications against Khazar invasions can still be seen. Armenian and Byzantine sources reveal that in the following years, the Khazar kingdom formed an alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire. They what? Listen to this. This is a major drop right here. The Khazar kingdom formed an alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire in its struggle against the Persians and became a significant factor in the regional balance of power. The 7th century Armenian bishop Sabaeus wrote in his history of Heraclius, they, Armenian nobles, went to serve the great Khagan, king of the northern lands. At the command of their king, the Khagan, they marched through the Jor Pass to come to the aid of the king of Greece. The Khagan, this being the title of the ruler of Khazare, maintained extensive relations with the Byzantine Empire. The future emperor, Justinian II, who had been exiled to the Crimea, escaped at the end of the 7th century to the Khazar kingdom, where he married a Khazar princess. She was rebaptized as Theodora and would later be a powerful empress. Nor was this the only marital tie between the realms. In the 10th century, the ruler and author Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus wrote that Emperor Leo III allied himself by marriage with the Khagan of Khazarea, keeping his daughter as wife for his son Constantine V, shaming the Byzantine Empire and himself because he thereby abandoned the precepts of the forefathers and treated them with disdain. This non-traditional interdynastic match took place in 732 AD, and the son born of it became the emperor, who was known as Leo the Khazar. This was also the zenith of the diplomatic relations between two mighty kingdoms. The Khazar succeeded in the course of many battles to halt the Muslims' northward sweep and temporarily save the Byzantine Empire from a menacing encirclement that would have precipitated its collapse. The many battles between the Muslims and the Khazars were described by numerous Arab chroniclers who had no qualms about copying each other's work. Ibn al-Athir wrote that they fought very fiercely and both sides held out. Then the Khazars and the Turks overcame the Muslims. After al-Jarrah fell on the battlefield, the Khazars coveted the country and penetrated far into it, reaching Mosul. This was in 730 AD, but the response was not long in coming. After a tremendous logistical effort and more battles, the Arab armies managed to repel the determined enemy. The commander, who would later be the Caliph Marwan II, even led strong forces into Khazare itself, and his condition for withdrawal was the conversion of the Khagan to Islam. You hear that? The Khazar sovereign accepted, and the Arab armies retreated to the Caucasus, so they made them convert to being Muslims. But do you see, there's a long history of these Khazars in war with Muslims, right? Do you guys see how far back this goes? So again, these Arab armies retreated to the Caucasus Mountains, which was agreed as the final boundary between Khazare and the Muslim world. As we shall see, the temporary conversion of the pagan Khazar kingdom was not very meaningful, though many of its subjects accepted the faith of Muhammad. So you see, these Khazar people are just converting either by force or by choice, but they converting, right? Most sources depict the Khazar kingdom as having a highly original dual government, a supreme holy leader, as well as an active secular leader, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, a diplomat and author who was sent by the Caliph al-Muqtadir in 921 CE to the Bulgar country by the Volga, crossed Khazarea, and described it in his rare travel notes on the Khazars and their political system. He wrote, "As for the king of the Khazars, known as Khagan, he is seen only once in 4 months, and at a respectful distance. He is called the Great Khagan, and his deputy is called Khagan Bey." All right, Bey. It is later who commands the armies, administers the kingdom, and looks after it. He sallies and raids, and the kings of the vicinity surrender to him. He goes every day to see the great Khagan in a deferential manner, showing himself humble and modest. More information is found in the works of the geographer and chronicler al-Istakri, writing in about 932. His description is livelier and more picturesque. As for their regime and government, their master is called Khagan Khazar, who is more exalted than the king of the Khazars, though it is the king who empowers him. When they want to empower a Khagan, they throttle him with a silk cord, and when he has almost suffocated, they ask him, "For how long do you wish to reign?" And he replies, "So many years. If he dies before that time, it is well. Otherwise, he is put to death at that time." Only the sons of well-known families may fill the post of Khagan, and he has no real power, but is worshipped and adored when the people appear before him. Yet no one enters his presence except a small number, such as the king and those of his rank, and no one is appointed Khagan except those who clave to Judaism. Okay? Other Arabic sources corroborate the existence of a dual power system in Khazare. This was an efficient regime. It maintained a mystique around the great Khagan and utilized the most gifted and competent prince as the Bey, who functioned as a military advisor. We're talking about Khazarians using, the Bey, the halo of sanctity that hung over the Khagan did not stop him from maintaining a harem of 25 women and 60 concubines, though this was not necessarily in devout emulation of the biblical King Solomon. All right, remember King Solomon had about 70 wives and about 300 concubines? Yeah. So when you're talking about the line of David, what you're really talking about, it's big. All right, so a little more ahead says, so we know that the Khazars were typical rice growers and regular consumers of fish and wine, though bulk of the kingdom's income came from tolls. Khazare straddled the Silk Road and also dominated the Volga and the Don rivers, which were major transportation routes. A further source of income was the heavy tax imposed on the numerous tribes governed by the kingdom. The Khazars were known for their flourishing trade, especially in furs and slaves, and their growing wealth enabled them to maintain a strong and well-trained military force that dominated all of southern Russia and today's eastern Ukraine. All right, the Khazars were where? Pay attention to that. Thus far, the descriptions of the Arab chroniclers coincide and even accord with the testimony of King Joseph's letter. The question of the Khazar language, however, is obscure. No doubt the great mixture of tribes and populations spoke various languages and dialects, but what was the language of the Khazar power elite? Al-Isakri, following Al-Bakri, wrote, "The language of the Khazars differs from that of the Turks and the Persian language, and does not resemble the language of any other nation. Nevertheless, most researchers assume that the spoken Khazar language consisted of Hunnic, Bulgarian dialects, with others from the Turkic family, Japhet languages. There is no doubt, however, that the Khazars' sacred tongue and written communication was Hebrew. The few extant Khazar documents indicate as much, and the Arab writer Al-Nadim, who lived in Baghdad in the 10th century, confirms it. As for the Turks and the Khazars, they have no script of their own, and the Khazars write in Hebrew. Inscriptions have been found in Crimea that are in a non-Semitic language written in Hebrew characters. Two of these characters, Shin and Sadiq, eventually entered the Cyrillic alphabet, presumably in the course of the Khazars' early rule over the Russians. Why did the Khazar kingdom not adopt the Greek or Arabic language for religious usage and high-level communication? Why did the Khazars become Jews when all their neighbors converted en masse either to Christianity or to Islam? And another question, when did amazing collective proselytizing begin? All right, we continue in the book, the invention of the Jewish people. We're in this part of the book. Still, we're talking about the Khazars. So it says here, Khazars and Judaism, a long love affair? One of the few surviving testimonies left by the Khazars themselves is the important document known to scholars as the Cambridge document. Its originality is less disputed than that of King Joseph's letter. This Hebrew manuscript, written by Jewish Khazar from the court of King Joseph, was found in the famous Cairo Genesis, published in 1912, and has since been kept at the Cambridge University Library. Little is known about the writer or the addressee, but it appears to have been written in the 10th century and may have been another reply to Khazai's request. The text is fragmented and many words are missing, but it is still a rich source of information. After a few missing lines, the letter reads as follows: Armenia and our ancestors fled from them, for they could not bear the joke of the worshippers of idols. And the princes of Khazare received them, for the men of Khazare were first without the Torah. Oh, they didn't have the Torah at first, and they too remained without Torah and scriptures, and made marriage with the inhabitants of the land, and mingled with them, all right, mingled with so many different peoples, and they learned their deeds and went out with them to the war continually, and they became one people. That's what they did. A bunch of people mixed together. Only upon the covenant of circumcision they relied, and some of them observed the Sabbath. Remember, the Scythians were there. When they're saying some of them and some of them are circumcised, remember the Scythians were there. Who's the Scythians? Sakai, Scythians, Saxons, sons of Isaac. And there were no king in the land of Khazare. Only him who won victories in the battle they would appoint over them as general of the army. Now it happened at one time when the Jews went forth into the battle with them, as was their wont, that on that day a Jew proved mighty with his sword and put to flight the enemies who came against Khazare. Then the people of Khazare appointed him over them as a general of the army, in accordance with their ancient custom. Do you guys see? The document also describes a tripartite brainstorming encounter between a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew, similar in essentials of the description in King Joseph's letter, and concluded, of course, with the appropriate decision in favor of Judaism. It seems that this literary historical model was very popular in that period, because early Russian chronicles describe the conversion of Vladimir I of Kiev to Christianity in almost the same manner, though naturally with a different outcome. A contemporary Arab writer also describes the Judaization of the king of Khazare following an intense theological debate, except that in his text the Jewish scholar hired an assassin to poison the Muslim scholar before the decisive confrontation, and in that way the Jew turned the king to his religion and converted him. The rest of the so-called Cambridge document, like its opening, suggests an interesting hypothesis concerning the Judaization of the Khazars. Israel, together with the men of Khazare, returned in perfect repentance, but also the Jews began to come from Baghdad, from Khorasan, and from the land of Greece, and strengthened the hands of men of the land. Remember, Jews meant Judean, or people from the tribe of Judah. So it says they were there, these Jews, to strengthen the hands of the men of the land and encourage themselves in the covenant of the father of the multitude, Abraham. And the men of the land appointed over them one of the wise men as judge, and they call his name in the tongue of Khazare, Kagan. Therefore the judges who arose after him are called by the name Kagan, even unto this day. As to the great prince of Khazare, they turned his name into Sabriel, and thus made him king over them. All right, guys, I actually get it. They literally, this Kagan was probably one of the bloodlines of the Israelites, a true bloodline. That's why he was like a priest, like somebody they worshiped, even though they still had a king. The Khazarians kept their power, but they had like this priestly kind figure, the Kagan. And as it's telling you here, guys, it is one of these people, these so-called Jews of the line of Abraham, that they're actually appointed as Kagans. That's deep right there. And again, he's a judge, like a Danite. Therefore, the judges who arose after him are called by the name Kagan, even unto this day. As to the great prince of Khazare, they turned his name into Sabriel, and thus made him king over them. Continue, says, it may be that this Sabriel was the post-conversion name of King Bulan, mentioned in Joseph's letter, and this story may well be unreliable, and the dramatic descriptions of the Judaization merely fables and sermons. However, stories about migration as the catalyst in the process of proselytization seem much more relevant to understanding Khazar history. The arrival of Jewish believers from Armenia, from today's Iraq, from Khorasan, which covered parts of modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and from Byzantium, may well have triggered the conversion of that strange kingdom to Judaism. Proselytizing Jews were driven from the arena of rival monotheisms, Christianity or Islam, to the lands of paganism. As in other regions that witnessed mass Judaization, so in Khazare, all right, just like in Khazare, it began with immigrants who convinced the pagans that their faith was preferable. The pagans, these are pagan people converting, and now they're Jews. Come on. The great mass proselytizing campaign that began in the 2nd century BC with the rise of the Hasmonean kingdom reached its climax in Khazare in the 8th century AD. Hasmonean, all right, these Hellenized, Romanized Jews. The Khazare Hebrew testimony about Jewish immigration finds support in Arabic literature. The Arab chronicler Al-Mawizdi wrote, "As for the Jews, they are the king and his court, and the Khazars his people." The Judaization of the king of the Khazars took place in the caliphate of Harun al-Rashid. Many Jews who had heard of it joined him from all the Muslim cities and from Byzantium. The reason being that Byzantine king in our time, the year 332 or 944 AD, Armanus Romanus, forcibly Christianized the Jews in his kingdom, upon which many Jews fled from Byzantium to the land of the Khazars. Jehuda Halevi noted in the Khazare that the Khazars converted in 740 AD, but the date may not be correct. A Christian document written circa 864 AD in distant western France stated that all the Khazare obeyed the precepts of Judaism. At some stage between the mid-8th and mid-9th centuries, the Khazars adopted Jewish monotheism as their particular faith and rite. It is also reasonable to assume that this was not a miraculous single act, but a long process. Even King Joseph's questionable letter describes the conversion as occurring in stages. King Bulan was persuaded by the logic of the law of Moses and became a Jew, but only King Obadiah, his grandson or great-grandson, reformed the kingdom and set the law in the proper order, built synagogues and seminaries, and adopted the Mishnah and Talmud. It is also said that he invited Jewish sages from far away to bolster the true faith among his subjects. In the 19th century, scholars were doubtful about the conversion of the Khazar kingdom. Today, it is not in dispute, okay? Today, guys, this is facts. They converted the Khazars. The spreading monotheism reached the Caucasus and the steppes of the Volga and on. Today's southern Russia, and convinced rulers and tribal elites to believe in the many advantages of a single deity. The question remains, why did Khazare opt for Judaism rather than the other monotheistic religions with their less onerous requirements? If we set aside the magical sermon included in King Joseph's letter, the Cambridge document, and Jehuda Halevi's book, we are left with the same explanation that accounted for Himyar's conversion, the desire to remain independent in the face of mighty grasping